In 2003, Dan Barker, my co-host, did a debate here at the University of Madison, Wisconsin, against a Christian apologist. There was a young man in the audience, a sophomore, we think, who was convinced that Dan lost that debate, and lost it pretty badly. But Dan raised enough questions that Patrick, this young man, went out and did a little research on his own, took some classes on his own, and eventually he dropped his Catholic faith and became an atheist. And not only did he become an atheist, he actually works here at the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
It's a good story.
He's the head of our litigation department right here at FFRF, one of our attorneys.
So we'll watch a clip of a little bit of that debate where Patrick was in the audience. But shouldn't we tell people who we are?
I guess we should. Let's do it.
Who are you? Hi, I'm Dan.
Andrew, pleasure to meet you, Dan.
I'm Dan Barker. Welcome to another episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
And I'm Andrew Seidel, the Director of Strategic Response here at FFRF. And on this week's edition of Ask an Atheist, we're going to debate debating maybe. But if you've got questions, as usual, about debating, anything related to FFRF, just type your questions in the comments, or you can email them to askanatheist@ffrf.org.
So you mentioned Patrick at that debate as an example of how debates can be effective. Patrick didn't change his mind that night.
Exactly.
But he was a student, and he got his mind thinking and finally moved one direction or the other. Bruce, we do have a clip from that debate we can look at. It's 2003.
Maybe. Yes. No.
Maybe.
Well, while we're waiting for Bruce.
There we go.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Absent from his antiquities before the 4th century, the time of Eusebius.
No, not been leaving. So that's the head of our litigation department.
Well, yeah, but see, that was after a 2-hour debate. Mm-hmm. And that was in the question period. And by then, I think Patrick either was moved by the Spirit or he had a class or something.
But the interesting thing is he was really convinced that you lost that debate at the time. And I mean, to me, that is really striking, and it's a great example. I mean, it's a personal story that we can tell. But, I think it's pretty rare to win over somebody at a debate, unless they are going into it with a truly open mind, which not a lot of people are. But you can always plant the seeds for later on.
So that's the question. Why do debates? And because in my experience, most people who come to debates are on one side or the other. Mm-hmm. They're either, yes, God exists, or I'm the Christian, and no, I'm not. It's almost like a sporting event. Yeah, we want our guy to win. And there's very few people in the middle. So at a university, however, there tends to be a bigger middle group than in a general audience.
Why do you think that is? Because these are students who are, they have more of an open mind. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's because for many of these students, it's the first time they're away from home. They're coming to a university city. For the first time, they're being exposed to new ideas. And so they're actually kind of wondering, well, what do I think? And sometimes I've heard students tell me, I disagree with you, but this is the first time I heard anyone even articulate another point of view. So they gave me points for doing a good job of at least letting them know that we atheists aren't just a bunch of dumb, scared, immoral people with our head in the sand. We've thought about this,
Well, I think that's important too, and it's one of the reasons, we are willing to do even terrible shows like Fox News a lot of the time is, having a face out there for atheism, whether it's in the debate or on national TV, that is friendly and happy, can shatter a lot of the misconceptions and stereotypes about atheists, which has a lot of value in itself right there.
Because when you actually see another human being and you see their face and you look at them move and you know who they are, then look at what, Bruce? Oh, okay. So Patrick, you mentioned that was 2003 in that debate with Mike Lacona. It was about the resurrection of Jesus, and he was a Catholic. And since then, he's joined our staff, as you pointed out, and he made a little video for us about
let's hear Patrick tell the story.
Patrick, up to
9
date.
years ago, I saw Dan Barker debate Christian apologists at the University of Wisconsin. They were discussing the resurrection of Jesus and whether or not it was true. At the time, I was Catholic and was very convinced Dan was wrong and that, in fact, the story was true. That debate prompted me to take a course on early Christian literature, and I, in fact, learned more and questioned my own beliefs. The more I read and the more I learned, the more I came to realize that I was being pretty much intellectually dishonest. Fast forward to 9 years later, I'm now an employee at FFRF and work for the vital mission of separation of state and church. I'm proud to be an out-of-the-closet atheist.
So he made that video about 7 years ago.
Yeah, that was 2000.
So it was 9 years
as well.
after 2003. Anyway, and Patrick's been with us for what? Almost 10 years now?
Since 2010, I think.
Yeah, so anyway, and Patrick is one of the attorneys. If you send a complaint in about a state church violation, Patrick is one of those who will handle that complaint.
Now let me ask you, how many debates have you actually done? I mean, you are a master at this. You've done how many?
Well, if you only count public, formally moderated debates,
Okay.
you know what I mean, with a clock, if you
Sure.
only count those, 136
Wow.
since 1985. That doesn't count a whole bunch of like TV, radio. I mean, how many?
Sure.
You know, I debated, quote unquote, William Lane Craig, for example, on a national TV show, but I don't count that as a actually formal, moderated
Formal
public
debate
debate
proceedings.
because it was more like a talk show debate. You know, so you and I have done how many debates in lowercase d? But the first one I did was 1985, February, in Nashville with a Church of Christ minister, Rubel Shelley, non-instrumental church. There was no piano up there, but there was a baptismal up there. And that was scary. And the first, well, you've done debates. The first 10, 20 debates you do are like nerve-wracking, and you stay up all night thinking, oh, I could have, I should have, oh, I could have said this, I could. But after a while, you get more relaxed, and you realize that you can't say it all in one night.
Well, and the Monday morning quarterbacking is always hard.
Yeah, I mean, we always do that. I mean,
Yeah.
It's always like you think, oh, I could have, I should have. So 136 sounds like a lot, but that was 85, so that comes out to about 4 a year, pretty much.
That's a
you
good
know,
amount.
so.
Now, have you heard from other people like Patrick? Have they reached out to you and said, I saw your debate and I thought you were wrong, or I saw your debate and you convinced me of something that, maybe
Yeah.
even after years?
Yeah, I have. In fact, in Sacramento, a man came up to me and said, I was at your debate up in Corvallis, Oregon, against James White. And he said, I was one of James White's friends and co-apologists, and now I'm an atheist. And your debate didn't convince me that night, he said, but it got me thinking and it got me wanting to study more. And so I said, well, have you told James White this? And he said, actually, I have, and we're not friends anymore. But I mean, that was kind of cool. So it's not like somebody goes to a debate and then suddenly, boom, just like that, they change them, especially if you're devout. But it can, like Patrick said, it gets you thinking, you start reading, you start studying, you start wondering. And then, of course, I have gotten emails from people who say the other thing.
Sure.
You know, I was agnostic, and then I went to your debate and I changed, you know what I mean? But I have to say, the few times that the debates have been, graded, judged, like who was the winner and who was the loser,
Yeah.
the few times that has happened, there was always been a shift in my direction. Like Campus Crusade or Crew, they put on these debates, and they hand out a card at the beginning. What is your position from 1 to 10 as you enter this debate? Mm-hmm. And then, as you leave the debate, what is your position? So you can actually see if there was any movement. And at least the 2 times that I know that was done and it was graded, you take all of these, nobody went from 1 to 10.
Sure.
But some people went from like maybe 9 to 7 or from 6 to 4. I mean, that kind of a thing. And when they do I think they call it the delta, the statistical, there was always, in both cases, there was a move in my direction. So if that's how you judge a debate, then I was a winner in that case.
I'm completely unsurprised by that. Now, one of your, maybe, I don't want to speak for you, but your highlights in your debating career was Oxford.
Oxford University. Well, it was a highlight because it was Oxford.
Because of where it was. Yeah, I mean, that room is sort of hallowed ground.
And in fact, it was the Oxford Union in Oxford, England, and the room, I think we have a clip of it, you can see, the room is where parliamentary procedure actually started, and there's Prime Minister Glad, all these pictures of all these great, And before the event, the students with the bow ties, they were toasting the Queen, and we were doing all this proper English, British stuff. And you'll see in this clip that I was kind of nervous, not just because of that, but because as I was doing the debate, Richard Dawkins was sitting a couple feet away from me, and he was there. He's the one who should have been doing the debate. And I was thinking, what is he thinking? Am I doing a good job? But let's watch the clip, and then I'll tell you how that debate was judged.
Okay, let's take a look.
I used to believe firmly in God. I was an ordained minister. I preached the gospel for 19 years. I felt this presence in my mind as I prayed. I got goosebumps as I was in communion with what I thought was the Holy Spirit of God. As I read the Holy Bible and read about the resurrection of Jesus, I dedicated my life to preaching that gospel that I thought was so real, that gave so much meaning, so much hope, so much beauty to the world. But I've changed my mind. I now know I was deluded. I was having a very real, very powerful, but mental experience that happens in most religions. There's no need for a belief in God. Millions, tens of millions of people on this planet live happy lives, productive lives, moral lives, purposeful lives, lives of hope and meaning, without deluding ourselves that there are these invisible personalities populating some supernatural realm. We are quite happy, thank you, without that belief. Based on all of that, it is more likely to reject the proposition than to accept it. Thank you.
So somebody should have told me my bow tie was crooked. I mean, it was kind of, we had to wear bow ties at that. And I don't know if you noticed, but the actual student leaders were wearing white bow ties to make sure they were the Oxford
Even more
Union.
formal. It's like
So-
the different levels at Downton Abbey, depending on how you're dressing.
Yeah, I think
for
so,
dinner.
yeah.
Well, let me ask you a question about some of the arguments you were making there, because those weren't necessarily sort of the strictly logical or strictly philosophical arguments against God. You were making, in a way, arguments that had some emotional heft to them too.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I did lay out the basic. I only had 15 minutes, right?
Not a lot of time.
And I actually planned a 10-minute speech, knowing that members of the audience in that debate format, they were allowed to make a point of information. And we were told that if someone in the audience asked for a point of information, they can interrupt your opening statement. And so I thought, well, I'm going to allow some time so that I have some elbow room.
Now, did that happen to you?
It did. It happened at least twice, and I was able to respond to them and still had time. And one of the opponents, you didn't see in that clip, but Peter Hitchens, who was Christopher Hitchens' brother. Mm-hmm. Christopher, of course, the leading atheist, and his brother is a believing Anglican. Christopher Hitchens brushed off all the points. He just said, I came a long way for this debate. Well, not longer than me. So I did make the intellectual points, but I wanted to frame it as a personal story. And I think that's what most people took home with him. Here's a guy who was a preacher.
Yes.
And then he felt it and he believed it, and now he's changed his mind. So,
I mean, I think those are really important points. I think you can fail if you only make a logical or philosophical argument if you don't also tackle that emotional side of things. Because as much as we want to say that humans are logical and rational beings, we are still guided a lot by our emotions.
Yeah, and also in my case at least, I can argue that hey, I've been there, I've done that, you know, and so they can't say, well, you're just some angry atheist who just doesn't like, you know, I've lived it and I felt it and I identify with that feeling. But we were talking about grading the debate.
Yes.
So this was November, that Oxford debate was November of 2012, the same month, in fact, the same week as the election, Obama's election. And the organizer, the guy with the white bow tie, got up and said, so now that the debate is over, we're going to vote with our feet, he said. So he said, if you support the proposition, which means this house believes in God, you will exit through this door. If you support the opposition, which was our side, you will exit through this door. And they had somebody counting as people exited. So 142 people went through the proposition door, and 163 went through the opposition door.
So you won.
We actually won by a greater percentage margin than Obama won the election that week. So I've heard people say, though, they were shocked that at Oxford University there would be 142.
That believed, yeah.
But don't you think that at a debate it's kind of a self-selected? People are coming because they
Sure.
really
But
care.
And
I
it's
mean,
what you talked about in the beginning. It's sort of a sporting event for a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's gladiator games in a way.
so maybe all the Christians at Oxford showed up to that one thing.
Certainly possible.
So we can say by an actual vote of Oxford University, there is no God.
Done. No more jobs needed.
So Andrew, you've been doing debates and you've been doing a lot of radio on that, but you did a very important debate a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, just a couple weeks ago.
In Kentucky, and we're going to watch a little bit about it. But can you tell us kind of the situation there?
Sure. It was at the University of Louisville. The McConnell Scholars Program hosted this event, and yes, it is that McConnell. And there's a Christian, a scholar, a guy named Mark David Hall, who's got a book coming out titled "Did America Have a Christian Founding?" And his answer is yes, it did, which is the exact opposite argument that my book makes, which is no, we are not a Christian nation, no, we're not founded on Judeo-Christian principles, and it's a good thing we're not. And so we had this debate just a couple weeks ago. It was a packed house. They said it was the biggest audience they'd ever had. There was people seated on the stairs in between the chairs. So it was a really, really full group and really excited group. It was a lot of fun.
So his book wasn't ready yet. You had books there to sell or to display.
I did. I sold quite a few after this.
So and that debate was broadcast on C-SPAN.
Yes,
I understand, and we watched it. It just was broadcast this last weekend on C-SPAN, and I think it was so powerful. We can't watch the whole debate that Andrew did, but let's look at his closing statement from the debate, which kind of gives you a flavor of what had just happened in the previous hour. This is Andrew. We're going to end with a little bit of Hall and then go to Andrew Seidel. This is about 5 minutes, so enjoy this.
I'm just going to conclude that the best answer to the question, did America have a Christian founding, is yes. And this answer is good news for all citizens, regardless of their religious convictions or lack thereof. Thank you very much.
The Ten Commandments, hell, original sin, biblical governments, Christian punishment, fear and obey your rulers, the very idea of vicarious redemption through human sacrifice. These ideas are central to Christianity, and they are fundamentally, irrevocably, irretrievably opposed to the principles on which this nation was built. Our American experiment was based on reason, not the Christian faith. The two systems conflict at a fundamental level. Now, I'm not an academic sitting comfortably in an office disconnected from the effects of my rhetoric. Yes, I've written a few articles. My book's got 1,300 citations. But at FFRF, we handle 5,000 state church complaints every single year. Half of those are in the public schools. Teachers telling kids that they have to pray before they go down to lunch each day. And oftentimes, those violations are justified with claims that this is a Christian nation, or that we are based on Judeo-Christian principles. Lawyers cite these claims, turning to people like my opponent to justify violating the rights of conscience of children, to justify Christian nationalism. And right now, America is in a desperate fight against Christian nationalism. That sinister exclusionary idea that to be an American is to be a Christian, and to be a Christian is to be an American. Now, I don't know whether my opponent would identify as being a Christian nationalist, but I know that his rhetoric fuels Christian nationalism. I know that, for instance, he appeared on David Barton's talk show a number of times, including just a couple days ago. Barton's book was pulled off the shelf. It had so many lies in it. Your publisher, I believe, actually, same publisher. I know that he's affiliated with the Heritage Foundation, which started that book, which in turn is part of a coalition of groups pushing Project Blitz. One of the bills in Project Blitz is the Religion and Legal History Act, which seeks to, quote, tell the story of the role of religion in the constitutional history of the United States. Sound familiar? The goal is to pass these ceremonial bills first and then pass laws that actually favor Christians. So ask yourself, what is this debate really about? This goes to the heart of several questions. Are we just seeking, is my opponent just seeking to correct the massive historical record, the libraries of historical scholarship, the generations of scholars that oppose his claim? If this is about history, why give expert testimony on behalf of those businesses who want to discriminate against customers because of who they are and who they want to marry? In that remarkable letter that Washington wrote to the Toro Synagogue in Rhode Island, he said that the government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. He didn't go on to say, unless you are a Christian and you open up a bakery, and then in which case you can totally discriminate against the gays. He didn't say that. If this is about history, why ask the Supreme Court to uphold a 40-foot-tall Christian cross, as my opponent has done? If this is about history, why work with groups like ADF leading the charge in favor of discriminating against these couples? If this is about history, why write briefs saying that states can take away women's reproductive choice or a gay couple's fundamental right to marry, as my opponent has? Now, I mentioned in the introduction that he needed to show that Christianity had a positive influence on the founding of America. That would have been an overreach, if and only if this were debate about history. But it's not. And I think he admitted as much, because if this had been just about history, he could have claimed any Christian influence, positive or negative, on the founding, including the Christian justifications for slavery and the subjugation of women. He didn't do this because this debate is not really about history. It's about using the government to promote Christianity now. This is about providing a historical gloss so that Christian nationalists like Donald Trump and Mike Pence can use the language of return, of getting back to our religious roots, to justify their current policies. This administration justified the child separation policy at the border with Romans 13, the same provision that was directly contradicted by the Declaration of Independence. They learned to do that in the White House Bible study. It's about moving the embassy to Jerusalem to hasten the second coming. It's about banning Muslims because they're not American enough. It's about overturning gay marriage, and it's about revoking a woman's right to choose. My opponent has been the intellectual Zamboni for Christian nationalists, following them around, buffing and polishing, working to put a respectable historical face on their religiously motivated policies. But the simple fact is that America was not founded as a Christian nation. We were not built on Christian principles because those principles are opposed to our founding principles.
1 minute.
He failed to name the Christian principles that positively influenced our founding, and instead named universal human principles and claimed them for Christianity. He could not show what was not there. What he did show is that this debate is not about history. This debate is about right now. Thank you.
That was powerful. And you did what you were just saying. You made it real. It wasn't just a bunch of intellectual talking points and dry, like your opponent was trying to do. Let's just look at bald history, but make it real. It affects our lives, and it affects human welfare right now, as people are arguing for. So isn't it fun? It's fun standing up in front of an audience and thinking on your feet. And
it was a lot of fun. Yeah. It was a really interesting debate, and it kind of goes to what you were talking about earlier, which if I were to have engaged in all the historical minutia that my opponent was throwing out in that debate, it would have gotten bogged down, and the message would have gotten
You did
lost
some of that.
really quick. A little bit.
Yeah.
But what I really tried to do was hit the high-level points, and you could see that in the closing, too, where the question is, did America have a Christian founding? And so what I'm trying to do is say, name some Christian principles on which we're founded. And he couldn't do that. He named things like life and liberty. He was just claiming for Christianity these
he said,
human principles.
Imago Dei.
That was one of them.
You remember that one?
Yeah.
Imago Dei is Latin for image of God. Supposedly, since we're created in the image of God, then human life has worth. And if you don't believe in that, then you just have no respect for human life.
Yeah.
But
and I think, it goes to what you're saying. You can't rebut every single argument that the other side makes. You have to kind of choose a few take-home messages that you want the people to go and investigate, and hopefully put a burr in their minds and really get them to do a little work on their own.
That closing statement that you gave was after the question. So you had already fielded a number of questions from the audience, right?
Yeah, so we did opening statements, 15 minutes each, and then questions from the moderator, then questions from the audience.
So it was an unusual debate because there was no actual formal rebuttal time.
Yeah, it was a little strange in that respect, and the university and the moderator seemed to kind of want to avoid that in a way. It was almost, there was a little bit of it was a little too much parallel for my taste. I would much rather have engaged.
Well, the audience would rather see a good exchange. When I debated Dinesh D'Souza 8 different times in 8 different states, he was really game for it. We sat down and just talked, back and forth. Well, like a normal kind of structured argument, and the audience likes that. They like to see the opponents go at each other. And Apparently, this debate they wanted to be more like side by side.
A little bit more.
But you did. You both talked about each other's points back and forth.
Yeah, we certainly did do some rebuttal.
Were any of the questions tough?
I mean, nothing that I was really unprepared for. I mean, and the nice thing about this arena is there are no new arguments for Christian nationalism, for saying that we are founded as a Christian nation. There are one of the things I try to do in the founding myth is to give our side better arguments, but on the other side, there are no new arguments to claim that we are founded as a Christian
Somebody
nation.
could find a long lost letter from Madison
They
that says,
could.
we are so that could happen, but it hasn't yet.
Well, what about you? Have you ever run into that in your 136 debates where there was a question that you got that you couldn't answer that stumped you?
Once in a while, they'll say something like, have you read so-and-so? And I have to say, well, no, I can't read everything. And then they'll say, aha, you haven't read so-and-so, therefore you're not really prepared. Why did you come to debate? And I might say, well, have you read so-and-so? But there was one debate in Delaware. It was, what was his name? The Reform, Doug Wilson in Delaware, who during the debate actually admitted that slavery is a good thing.
Wow.
I said, the Bible, Jesus said you should beat some slaves less hard than others. Is slavery good? And he said, yes. And in Psalms it says you should be happy to dash innocent babies against the rocks. Is that a good thing? And he said, if God said it, then yes. But after this long debate, 2 hours, a member of the audience came up, and I thought I'd heard every question in the world by then. I mean, this was like debate number 60 or something. And, your mouth is dry and you're really tired. So he got up and he said, so, Mr. Barker, I have a question for you. Are you a practicing homosexual? And I sort of mumbled something like, because I didn't want to say, oh, no, I'm not a homosexual. Yeah. I mumbled something about, well, no, but why is that even relevant?
Yeah.
I mean, what? Because in his mind, obviously, the reason I don't believe in God is so that I can be free to sin.
Yes, of course.
It must be, and so I'm wondering why that's so important to him. What I should have said, later that night I'm thinking about what I could have answered.
The Monday morning quarterback.
I should have said, no, I'm not, but now that I've met you, oh, what's your name? But anyway, once in a while they'll throw out some question that's, I remember with Michael Horner in Iowa. Do we have questions now?
Well, yeah, I have a question that's right on that. So
okay, go ahead.
What's the most ridiculous argument you've ever gotten at a debate? Do you want to answer that one?
That I've ever heard?
Yeah, the most ridiculous argument that you've ever gotten at a debate. Kelly Trudeau asks that.
Okay, there's a number of them, but I'm thinking about Tufts University. We were debating the resurrection of Jesus.
Okay.
And this professor gets up and says, according to quantum physics and the uncertainty principle, the molecules within the stone that was blocking the tomb could have shifted probabilistically so that the body of Jesus could have passed through the grid and exited the tomb. And we now know this from scientific principle. This was a professor at Tufts saying something. And my response was something like, well, then it wasn't a miracle.
Yeah.
If this was a scientific thing that happened, then it wasn't really a miracle. I mean, a miracle is supposed to violate science. Why are you bending over backwards to try to make a scientific explanation?
Yeah, if it confirms the laws of nature, that's by definition
and I'm trying to think of some other weird... in Akron, Ohio, a professor of philosophy, his whole argument was that God exists because immaterial minds exist.
Okay.
And so even some of his students were going, huh? Even if that were true, how does that connect to God?
Yeah, I mean, and this is the interesting thing about strategy. How do you decide where you're going to just go ahead and accept the premise of their argument? Because on that one you can just say, you know what? For the purposes of this debate, I will concede that there is such a thing as an immaterial mind. Yeah. Now what?
Yeah,
now do the rest of the work on your proof that means there's a God. So, for instance, in my debate with Mark David Hall, I said, I don't even care what the founders believed personally, what their religion was. Like, I will concede, for the sake of argument, that they were all God-fearing, Jesus rose from the dead Christians, even though we know that's not true. I could concede it because you would still have to show then that they used the principles of their religion on which to write the Constitution and base the laws of our nation, which you can't do.
You would have to connect the dots. And that's a phrase I found useful in closing statements.
Yeah.
Did my opponent connect the dots? And they throw out a bunch of stuff, but do they actually make a coherent? I just thought of another silly one. Okay. I was in Toronto with my first and only debate against a Hindu.
Okay.
He was a Vedic astrologer. And I gave him all this evidence that Vedic astrology doesn't work, scientific proof. And he said, well, those arguments are wrong. And I said, well, you didn't even know about them. I know they're wrong. And I said, well, give me your evidence. What evidence do you have that Vedic astrology actually works? And he said, I'll give you my evidence. Last week, I received an email from Brazil.
So connect the dots for me.
And he says, I received an email from Brazil. And the audience is kind of waiting for it. And then he looked around and he says, well, if Vedic astrology doesn't work, why are people all over the world contacting me to get my advice? He neglected to say that it only works if you pay for it, by the way, and that's his living. But I think that was pretty kind of weird. He got an email from a woman in Brazil, so that proves that Hinduism is true.
I mean, that's definitely a ridiculous one. Phil Monroe asks, what's the most frustrating aspect of formal debates?
Well, we can both answer that.
Yeah.
I think the most frustrating is that you don't get to say everything you wanted to.
Yeah.
And in my early debates, I used to over-prepare. And that's dangerous because it'd be like a ship that goes out into harbor and then it sinks because you're trying to say too much.
There, yeah.
And I learned right away, or after maybe 20, 30 debates, that the audience doesn't miss what you don't say. You don't have to, you can't do it all in a 15-minute and then some rebuttal. You can't, you've got to just sort of basically hit it and just leave it because, and really, during a debate, you should hit your point right at the start and then elaborate. It's a real mistake to first set up. I did, in La Crosse, I debated, or Eau Claire, I think it was La Crosse, Wisconsin, a really nice professor of ancient literature. He got up and he said, okay, before I make my point, I would first like to back up and establish a historical framework within the context that we can understand the terminologies and the definitions of the words. And then his time ran out. And he never got to his point.
Oh, yeah.
And then he said, I shouldn't be doing debates. So the clock ticking is frustrating. And when you know this, when you're talking in before a public audience on the clock, you don't pace yourself, so your mouth gets really dry.
Oh, yeah.
And so you have to drink a lot of water, and then you're trying to get your time in before the clock. So it's easier to prepare less. And then maybe during questions you can round out some of or maybe during rebuttal you can round out some of that stuff.
I think I agree. I think it's the hardest thing, most frustrating thing is knowing that you're going to have to leave a lot of red meat out there. Knowing that your opponent is going to say things that are 100% wrong, that you know the information to rebut, that you could rebut if given the time, but that you have to leave hanging out there because you've got to get your central points across and you've got to rebut other things. And it's sort of doing that calculus on the fly and knowing what's the most important thing to rebut, I think, is the hardest. And then also I think it's the esprit d'escalier, that staircase where you're like, oh, I should have said that, and that can be pretty frustrating.
But look what happened with Patrick. I mean, there was a lot of data that happened, and I bet most people leave a debate and they don't remember 90%. They remember a few little things. But with Patrick, he decided, well, then let me go and study. And he took a class in it, and let me find out more about this, because it's too broad. And the kind of debates we do, it's history, it's philosophy, it's science, it's personal experience, it's, it's all sorts of fields, and you can't be a total expert in all of these fields.
Sure. So Caitlin Owens asks an interesting question. First, she says, I'm a proud FFRF member. Thank you, Caitlin. We need the support. We appreciate it. Dan, I was wondering if you've changed your mind about debating Dinesh D'Souza. So maybe tell everybody about the statement you wrote a little while ago first.
So I did change my mind about Dinesh D'Souza. He and I did 8 debates. And backstage, he's very personable, very friendly. I guess, is there time to tell the story? We did a debate in Pennsylvania at Messiah College, a Christian college. Before the debate, we had dinner in this huge dining room of the president of the college, and there was like 50 people there. And at my table, Dinesh was sitting there, and the Christian organizers, and I think I was the only atheist in that whole room, obviously.
Now, real quick, was this before or after he went to jail?
This was,
It was before he went to
before.
jail. Okay.
So there was a young woman sitting next to Dinesh at the table, and nobody was talking to her. And so I remembered I'd met his family in San Diego. And so I thought, well, who is that? So I just leaned over and I said, so are you Dinesh's daughter? And then Dinesh leaned over and he said, she's my fiance. Well, that wasn't his wife.
Yeah.
I had met his wife, and this Christian organizer next to me, he told me he was bringing his assistant. Well, the next day, that whole scandal broke.
Wow.
That he was cheating on his wife, and Dinesh said something like, I didn't know it was wrong to be engaged before you're formally divorced. I didn't know that was wrong. So
Wow.
he got fired from King's College in New York City because he was the president there. And then later, he was convicted of election fraud. What is that called? Campaign contribution fraud.
Yeah.
And so he contacted me a little bit after that and said, I want to do a debate with at Hagee, Hagee's church in Texas.
Sure.
And I said, I don't think so, Dinesh. I think your reputation, I don't think it's going to help me or FFRF to be associated with somebody like you anymore. And then he sent me back an email with a link to the speech that he gave at Liberty University saying, my star has not fallen. I gave a speech at Liberty, and look at it, it's packed with 5,000 people. I'm still a big thing. And of course, he failed to say that those students had to come. Those students it was part of their assignment to be there in that audience. So,
and he's also doing that thing where he's trying to push, he's getting more and more extreme to try to stay more and more relevant. Just this weekend he did a tweet about Greta, the young climate change activist, likening her to a Nazi and Nazi propaganda because she's a Nordic young girl with braids, essentially. Yeah. So really, really hateful, awful
and his political movies that he made. I've met some Christians who loved Dinesh, and they loved that movie he made about Hillary, and they believe every single thing. And so we're not a political group. I can't talk about that kind of stuff.
But it raises an interesting question. Like, how do you debate against someone who doesn't share the same respect and doesn't care about stating truth and facts and using objective facts? They would prefer to use alternative facts. How can you even begin to have a legitimate, real debate against somebody like that?
So you make your case. You always get an opening statement, and sometimes, almost always, a closing. So you make your case, and then you trust the audience to see. It's a mistake in a debate to say, my opponent is stupid, my opponent is uninformed. It's a mistake to do that. Let the audience do that. You know what I mean? Let the audience make their conclusion. Oh, look what he said.
So you have to trust the audience.
Yeah, because the audience is there. They want to hear, they want to learn. So you make your case, and then you let him hang himself to at least the people that are thinking.
So Brian Morris said, who I met on Saturday, said it was great meeting you, Andrew. Oh, actually, Brian told me this story. So Brian was on a flight to Texas, and he had a copy of my book, and he had it sitting on his lap, and a guy came and sat down next to him and kind of did like one of these, kind of like looked down and saw the title of the book and reached up and rang the call button.
Yeah.
The flight attendant came back and he said, I don't want to sit next to this guy. And got up and got a new seat because he saw the title of my book and didn't want to sit next to him.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's interesting. But we have one final question from Mel Grossbeck, who says, I'm not sure if you saw the debate with Ken Ham and Bill Nye a couple of years ago, but when they were both asked what would change their minds about religion, Nye said one piece of evidence, and Ham said nothing would change his mind. So she wants to ask us the same question. What would change your mind?
So that comes up in some of my debates. Either the opponent or an audience member will ask, what would change your mind? And I give some examples. A clear prophecy, for example. If you prayed and you told me that God had revealed to you that tomorrow at 12, 14, and 17 seconds, a meteor from south-southwest at an 82-degree angle would hit your house and go through the Navajo rug down into the basement and end up 17 inches below the basement floor, composed of 84% iron and 2% iridium. And then if that happened, if that actually happens, as you told me, that would drastically alter my opinion about, so you can give examples of things that actually would change our mind. We free thinkers are open because we want to know what's true. And usually the opponent answering that question says something like, well, if you could prove to me that Jesus did not rise from the dead. Or they'll come up with something, they'll try to come up, and I say, well, that's already been done. It's already been shown that the resurrection accounts are not only contradictory, but they're legendary. So yeah, could you think, what if someone asked you that?
Well, I think the central answer is evidence. If I were presented with evidence, I would change my mind. Atheism is it's the position I hold right now. I'd happily change my mind to follow the evidence. The question that I always come back to is what would be strong enough evidence? And what you just gave is pretty good. But then the part of me is also wondering, well, if something like that happened, I would also be questioning my own state of mind. Did this really happen, or am I kind of maybe losing it? What is it evidence of? Is it evidence of a God and that this prophecy is real, or is it evidence that maybe a screw has been loosened? So I don't know a full answer, but definitely presented with evidence would be.
We have to say that, and I suppose it's possible that the opponent knew that meteor was coming in advance. I suppose that's possible. And the scientists are saying it's going to hit tomorrow at this angle.
But how did they know about the Navajo rug? That's
exactly. How could they get it to go right? But still, if there's a God, don't you want to know it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if it's there, of course we're not like sticking it. Nope, I don't care. There's evidence, and then there's good evidence.
Yep. And I think I think it's Matt Dillahunty who's got the line, I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible.
Yeah.
Matt, also a very competent and experienced debater. But I agree with that. I'm an atheist because there's no good evidence that a God exists. If that were to change, then I would change my mind.
And very few of the other side says they're willing to change their mind. Very few of them do. Or they might give a hypothetical,
Well, until then, I'm going to continue to host Ask an Atheist instead of Ask a Believer.
So do you think a major purpose of a debate is to change your opponent's mind?
I think that'd be pretty rare.
Yeah.
No, I think it's for the audience, and I think it's for the people out there watching. I think maybe you could shift their opinion on some things slightly. But that's actually a very interesting question. I'd be interested to see if there's data on that too.
So it's kind of nice to think about, but I don't go into a debate with the idea that I'm going to change Dinesh's mind.
Yeah.
I don't do that. But the audience, usually, especially at a university, maybe 20, 30% of the audience are really, There's another subsidiary benefit of a debate in that it provides a local event that our members can come to.
Yeah.
So I do a debate in Boise, Idaho.
Absolutely.
We can advertise to FFRF members in Boise. Wow! So they get to come to an event and they meet each other and I meet them. So that's kind of a neat thing too to happen.
It is. It's nice to be able to herd those cats together for
Some of them showed up in Louisville, right?
Oh yeah. The audience, I would say, was pretty supportive of my side of the argument. I don't think that was all because of my opening statement.
Yeah.
Though I wish it were.
Well, it was good. You did a good, and you prepared. You prepared kind of like an attorney prepares. I don't know.
I did.
why.
I wish I'd had a little more time to prepare. And I know this stuff. I wrote a book about it, so I know it inside and out. It's more of a question of, it's different writing a book than it is having a 15-minute chunk and then a 5-minute closing chunk, and then we were supposed to have 5 minutes for each question, but the moderator kept hacking that down.
Are you going to analyze that debate later, or are you going to just let it ride?
Maybe at some point I'll do a post-mortem. Yeah. Mark David Hall wants to do another one, so we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Yeah.
Any more questions?
I think that's all the questions we have for today. So
right.
I think that's our show.
Well, I guess that's our show for today, and we want to thank you for watching.
We invite you to become a member of FFRF to help us in our vital work to keep state and church separate and to educate the public about the views of non-theists. That's what we've been talking about today, education. So visit our webpage, ffrf.org, or call us, 800-335-4021.
And then join us next week for another episode of FFRF's Live Ask an Atheist. Same time, same place.